The year is 2008, and the survival horror genre is skyrocketing in popularity, introducing new and continuations of already popular franchises such as Resident Evil 5, Alan Wake, and Left 4 Dead. However, Dead Space revolutionizes the genre and is known as one of the most iconic horror game titles to this day. Developed by EA's Visceral Games, it redefines the meaning of horror by being more action-packed. The game was heavily inspired by classics like Alien and Event Horizon, which took its players through corridors of unsettling rooms of dread and psychological horror, while simultaneously blending sci-fi elements. This video will cover the theme, gameplay, history, and cultural impact, which ultimately led to the game's remake in 2023. There were many interpretations of what survival horror is back in the mid-2000s, with studios focusing on more of an action pathway with their games such as Resident Evil 4 back in 2005, which abandoned the true defining feature of horror. It was at that moment that EA's Visceral Games, formerly known as EA Redwood Shores, made the decision to create a project that does justice to the meaning of survival horror, one that focuses more on vulnerability, atmosphere, and psychological dread. The setting and atmosphere of Dead Space was more than just a simple backdrop. It gave the USG Ishimura a form of sentience, purposefully done by the developers, with adding claustrophobic spaces and rooms and random unsuspected explosions so that, no matter where you were in the game, you would never feel safe. In addition, the game's HUD is all on Isaac Clarke's engineering suit, meaning that your typical health bar, ammo count, inventory, and other mechanics were nowhere else, making the game feel more immersive. It was also inspired by ocean diving suits, showing off the oxygen meters on the backs of divers. Because of how unique and revolutionary the game was, it became a huge success, sparking a franchise like spin-offs, comics, novels, and animated films. But the heart of the series will always be the games. With the second game being released in 2011, fans were compelled with how narrative-driven the sequel was. The game gave Isaac Clarke a voice and full dialogue, completely removing the silent protagonist element from the first game. It also put emphasis on mental health themes such as Isaac's dementia from the events of the first game and hallucinations of his diseased partner created by the marker signal. The third game, Dead Space 3 from 2013, was not received well by fans. The game catered towards a more action-oriented experience with a co-op and weapon crafting feature, but completely neglected the elements that made Dead Space so unique. The franchise was on ice for a long time, with no updates from EA about a possible fourth installment. Thankfully, it wasn't until 2023 when a full remake of the first game would be released, developed by a new studio that successfully managed to capture the original charm and uniqueness while adding something new to modernize it. Dead Space was ahead of its time. At its core, it is a reflection of being alone, being horrified by your body and mentally falling apart. Deep loneliness and existential anxiety are reflected in Isaac Clarke's journey through the Ishimura in the original game, with events that will certainly make the player feel uneasiness. Players are seeing reality itself fall apart, not just escaping physical dangers. The primary antagonists in the game are the necromorphs, which are twisted, reanimated corpses created by the marker. Their horrible, ugly shapes show a profound dread of bodily decay and loss of humanity. Horror researcher Noel Carroll points out that Dead Space's technique of altering the natural order of the human body often generates disgust, a form of body horror. However, the necromorphs are not the only threat within the franchise. The game has fictional religious themes centered around humans worshiping the marker known as the Church of Unitology. They believe that turning into necromorphs would bring them salvation, which is threatening for Isaac throughout the game. This theme criticizes the risks of blind faith and corporate abuse, which makes the experience even more psychologically horrifying. As mentioned before, Isaac was a silent protagonist, with the game's creator and director, Glenn Schofield, comparing him to Gordon Freeman from the Half-Life series. On the other hand, the remake gives Isaac a voice, allowing him to react to the things around him. This helps the player understand what Isaac is going through mentally and emotionally, especially with moments like the hallucinations of his deceased partner, Nicole. Ultimately, all of the things that happen within the game amplifies Isaac's insanity, which breaks the line between what is real and what is not, effectively enhances the theme. Most survival games require the player to hit a certain weak spot or the head when you want to defeat an enemy. However, Dead Space uses a different method. The game introduces a dismemberment mechanic which encourages the player to shoot the limbs of the necromorphs to defeat them. The plasma cutter, a mining tool turned into a weapon, is iconic for the game's dismemberment mechanic and lets the player experience firsthand how the mechanic works. This mechanic was made to challenge the player with a certain learning curve and would change how every player would approach combat. It was very important to have great precision, resource conservation, and quick thinking. Ammunition should not be taken for granted, health was valuable, and fear sometimes resulted in terrible deaths. Glenn Schofield himself claims the design sought to make players feel vulnerable, not powerful. Another important gimmick was the stasis module in the Kinesis. Stasis allowed Isaac to slow enemies and objects down, while Kinesis allowed you to move heavy objects with ease. Both of these mechanics were used primarily to solve puzzles and strategic combat, giving more variety in the gameplay. This also reinforces Isaac's identity more as an engineer rather than a soldier, using his tools as improvised weapons to survive. The zero-gravity zones allowed straightforward movement from platform to platform, although it was very restricting when utilized. Luckily, that problem was fixed in the remake, completely removing the old mechanic and replacing it with omnidirectional flight with the option to land on platforms. Every inch of the Ishimura added to the suffocating mood when combined with the environmental narrative like blood trails, frantic graffiti, and unexpected failures. The game was met with massive success within the industry and was a marvel of the horror games genre, winning rewards like Best Sound Design and Best Action Game by IGN. It proved to many studios and other game companies that true horror can be represented without discarding the depth or ambiance, so that horror could be commercially profitable. Later games like Alien: Isolation from 2014, which also stressed environmental dread and vulnerability, and the Callisto Protocol from 2022, created by Striking Distance Studios under Glenn Schofield's direction, show the impact of the game. It even went as far as Resident Evil doing the same, with their newer games and remakes returning to what made them so good back in the day, like slower and more tension-driven experiences. Maybe when the franchise was dead after Dead Space 3, the fans kept it alive with communities from Reddit to YouTube, sharing graphical and gameplay improvement mods, retrospectives, and deep analysis videos. The 2023 remake was well received by critics and consumers alike for maintaining the original content while updating the gameplay, storyline, and accessibility features. It demonstrated how survival horror, when written with passion and dedication, can have a lasting appeal. Dead Space stands today as a titan of survival horror, remembered by die-hard fans during its downfall, and remembered by all in its revival. The claustrophobic settings, horrific transformations, and psychological dread were all well-known elements that were combined to create an unforgettable experience that revolutionized a genre. Visceral Games produced more than just a game. They left a legacy. With the amazing success of the remake, the series lives on strong, introducing new audiences to more variety of horror. And overall, Dead Space serves as a reminder that real terror is about facing the loss of humanity itself, not about what threatens us from the shadows. Thank you all for watching, and please give the series a try if you have not played it yet. It is by far one of my favorite games of all time, and hope that in the near future, they continue to produce more remakes and maybe even a fourth game. That's all for now. See ya.